The gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Dellums.
Gentleman from California, Mr. Dellums, is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my distinguished colleague for yielding. Mr. Speaker and members of the House, we will debate the merits of this issue in a few moments. But I would like to, in the time that I have available to me, address several comments that have been made, prefacing my remarks by making this comment to all of you here. In 1986, 2 years ago, this body passed a bill similar to the so-called Dellums bill. I brought this bill 2 years ago in the nature of a substitute, challenging the regular order of things, going against the grain. But to my shock and the shock and surprise of many people in this body and around the country, they passed the Dellums bill 2 years ago. So this notion about the Dellums bill being some incredible monster is absurd. You did it 2 years ago with the acquiescence of both sides of this aisle, Democrat and Republican. Now, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, members of this body, to the question of political motivation, I rarely, if ever, rise to challenge anyone here on a personal level, because I know that when we walk into these chambers, we cease to be individuals, but must lift ourselves much larger than that and become responsible representatives of the people's will. And so, Mr. Broomfield, I choose not to challenge you personally. Mr. Burton, I choose not to challenge you personally. To my distinguished colleague from Pennsylvania, I choose not to challenge you personally. And I assume you did not challenge me personally when you talked about political motivation. This black American human beings brought the first sanctioned bill in the history of this country in 1971. I have been in this body nearly 18 years. This has been no quick fix. Great part of my adult life has been struggling to see America champion the cause of freedom and dignity and equal rights for human beings. I know what it means to be black in a society racist. And I understand what it means to be black in a world that cannot deal with human beings because of the color of their skin. I challenge any of you to challenge me on a personal level as if in some way we've reduced ourselves to petty, mundane, earthbound, and pedestrian notions of political motivation. I am here because I believe as a human being that my responsibility is not only to be a citizen of California, a citizen of the United States, but to be a citizen of the world. And to see to it, Mr. Speaker, members of this body, that we speak to the highest and best that we can. To the question of this being a Dellums warfare bill, that is absurd. I came here 18 years ago to raise my voice in the name of peace. So this opportunity may be the last opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to move away from bloodshed that may be the undeniable future of South Africa unless we are prepared to act. One of my colleagues said that we sit here in the comfort of the chambers of the Congress of the United States and bring discomfort on human beings in South Africa. Two responses. Sanctions hurt, Mr. Burton, but apartheid kills, Mr. Burton. I would also say that there have been members sitting in the comfort of this chamber who sent our young people to fight and die in Vietnam. They sat in the comfort of these chambers and allowed 57,000 American people to be returned to America in body bags, ostensibly fighting for freedom and dignity in the democratic way. Well, I'm not asking you to declare war on South Africa. I am a voice of peace. I am simply saying in a nonviolent way, let us try to preclude death and destruction. Mr. Broomfield, with respect to timing, you said that this bill comes up at the wrong time. Let me say this to you on the record in the public. We are not here bringing this bill to attempt to embarrass the Republicans. That is absurd. We're here to try to free South Africa. And the fact of the matter is, as you know it, we're talking about getting out of here October 5th because members' self-interest join on October the 5th, and that is to get out of here to go get the jobs back. And so we're talking about coming back after Labor Day with less than 30 days opportunity to get the other body to move, to get to a conference, to get a bill to the president who may veto it and then come back with a veto override. So we asked the leadership to put this bill on before the break because we knew that time was running out. Second point on timing, Mr. Speaker, you suggest the issue of Namibia and Angola that's being worked out by the Assistant Secretary, Mr. Crocker. I met with Secretary Crocker, and the National Security Advisor, Mr. Cullen Powell, yesterday at 4 p.m. They said to us, go forward and debate the issue, vote on the amendments, hold final vote until after the break. Would the gentleman yield additional time to me?
Mr.
Time of
Speaker,
the gentleman has expired.
Mr. Speaker, I yield the gentleman from California 2 additional minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 additional minutes.
He said if you would hold off on the vote until after the break so we can tie the knot on the package. Mr. Broomfield, you know what our response was? We said we're reasonable people. You have not raised political considerations, we will not. You choose to achieve a foreign policy objective, so do we. So we're prepared to be reasonable. We will hold final vote on the sanction bill until after the break. If you are prepared to come to the table, equally prepared to bargain. They said, what's your offer? I said, get the president to agree not to veto the bill. And if the president agrees that he would not I'm not asking him to sign it, just don't veto it. Otherwise, you're asking us to kill our effort, and we refuse to do that. They said they couldn't deliver, so we're here going forward because that's our responsibility. Now, with respect to members leaving here, our responsibility, we're being paid to be here. We're not being paid to take off 3 days early to a convention or 3 days early to a weekend. We're being here to stand on the floor of Congress, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, with all due respect, until hell freezes over for us to do our jobs. And our responsibility, I can't hear right now, our responsibility is to be here to vote. So don't give me that flimsy argument. Finally, Mr. Chairman, this notion of convenience, you could have argued that, Mr. Burton, during slavery. You're going to cause black people to lose their jobs. That didn't make any sense during slavery, and it makes no sense in 1988. Mr. Speaker, I would yield to my distinguished colleague for a moment, and you speak and let me respond.
I just want to ask one question of my learned colleague, and that is, you're very concerned about the plight of the blacks in South Africa.
More than I can ever tell you, my brother.
And I think that's very good. But why is it I never hear you make any comment about the 1.5 million people that are being starved to death by the black communist government of Ethiopia, just north of there?
Let me tell you, I've spoken on this floor on numerous occasions. I think that's a cheap shot, because this gentleman has said perhaps more often than any other person on this floor that the struggle for human rights should take us beyond the narrow confines of our ideological position or our relative parties. A commitment to human rights should not be a commitment simply to the left challenging right-wing governments or right-wing members challenging left-wing governments. We ought to have a human rights commitment, a standard of human rights that we can apply to all nations in the world, and I've said that publicly on this floor. Challenge me to it, unless you and I go forward in the 101 Congress to see to it that we put that together. If you mean what you say, I mean what I say. I'm on the public
Time
track.
the gentleman has expired.
Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Broomfield.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks. I'd
Without
like just
objection to order.
make this observation. I've always had the highest respect for the gentleman from California, Mr. Dellums. We spoke before the call-up of this bill, and I told him that I was going to hit it hard, and there's a lot of reason for it. We both share the same feeling about apartheid. I don't think there's a member in this House that isn't opposed to the racism that goes on in South Africa. The real question here is, how do we approach it? And the thing that really bothered me is the timing. And you've got to admit, your presidential candidate has already come out in opposition to he's for full and complete disinvestment, as you are advocating right here. So that was quite an ironic thing. Your platform at the convention was quite vague, and I thought I had a legitimate reason to point that out here on the floor.
Would you
the second point, let me one final comment. And I think you'll have to admit that the alternative that I was offering or will offer today is a serious attempt. It's different approach than what you're offering. In other words, it brings into play our allies who have been benefiting from the act that we passed 2 years ago. And I resented, I have to let you know this, how this was handled in the Rules Committee to give me a total of 15 minutes on my side to explain this important amendment. And that's the reason for the tone of the speeches I've been giving.
Would the gentleman yield briefly?
You better believe it. I'll be happy to.
First of all, I appreciate, if the gentleman stay on his feet, first of all, I appreciate the sentiment of that. I have no control over the Rules Committee. Look, I've been struggling against the grain in this body for 18 years. You know that. I have not ascended to the lofty levels of the leadership of this body. Maybe someday maybe we can talk about how that changes. If you guys want to support me
Well,
for
I've been here
Speaker,
for
that might
32.
work out. At any rate, let me just say to you that I appreciate the sentiment of your comments. But rest assured, I would say to my friend, that my desire to bring this bill to the floor and many other members had nothing to do with presidential politics here. If the presidential election were not going forward, I would continue to be coming forward. Because my objective here is not simply to pass a bill. I want to end apartheid. I want to see Nelson Mandela free, and I'll not stop until I do.
Mr. Chairman, may I have just 30 seconds to make one more observation?
Thank
Because
you
I
for
think
that.
it's important.
Mr. Speaker, I yield the gentleman 30 additional seconds.
Gentleman is recognized
Mr. Speaker,
for 30
I
seconds.
really believe the gentleman from California is in a negotiating period, and he recognizes the importance of this. Why don't you go along with me and put this off until we come back, where we'll have all the members here to participate in this debate? I'll do everything to expedite it and work with you on that matter.
Get the president to agree not to veto
Well-
this bill, and you and I got a deal. We'll shake hands right now.
All right, can you get Mr. Dukakis to
gentleman
back
has
off on his
expired.
position on South Africa?
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Craig.
Gentleman from Idaho is recognized.